Welcome back to another episode of Practical Nutrition. My name is Alix.
I'm Cassie.
And I'm Sara.
And today we are talking about hydration. So it's getting a little bit warmer outside, so it's important to be sure that we're staying hydrated as it is all year long, but it seems like sometimes people think about it more as it gets warmer out.
Yes.
So I feel like it's a good topic moving into the springtime. So as we know, drinking fluids is imperative to be able to stay alive. We all know that. And there's some research that shows that if you don't have food for a couple weeks, you're okay. But if you go without water for 2 to 3 days, detrimental. Can't live past it. So it's kind of interesting how important water is. Your body's made up of 60 to 70% water, depending on a number of things. Therefore, as we know, it's important to stay hydrated. According to the Journal of Biological Chemistry, the parts of our body are composed of various amounts of water. I don't know if you knew that. It was kind of interesting to read these. So the brain and heart are composed of roughly 73% water. Lungs are made up of about 83% water. Skin contains about 64%. Muscles and kidneys are made up of about 79%. Muscles are only made up of about 20% protein, and the rest is made from water. Going back to muscles, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think most people probably don't know that.
Yeah, only 20%, and then the rest is from water, so that's pretty interesting. Bones contain 31%, so as you can see, water is super important in our body. Also, those who have a higher level of fat mass only contain anywhere from 40 to 50% water. This means that the more fat you store, the less water you have. So, another interesting fact.
Very interesting. And also when you think about the scale, which we talk about that all the time, in your body weight, if you are muscular, you can have a lot bigger fluctuations with the scale based on water weight, how well hydrated you are. So that's another reason the scale isn't the best way to
talk about the scale so much. So just another reason not to worry so much about it, not pay so much attention. And as Americans, typically we're more dehydrated than we are hydrated. About 75% of Americans are chronically dehydrated.
We could do better.
Come on, guys. And we understand that it's hard, but we do have some tips at the end that we're going to dive into. But first and foremost, why do we need fluids and why do we need to stay hydrated? So Cassie's going to dive into that.
Yes. So, the main thing is temperature regulation. So it's the way that our body keeps us at a correct body temperature. So, and it's an amazing design, really. So we lose water through our skin, which we know as sweat and perspiration. So, and that acts to cool our body by helping maintain a stable temperature. The more water we lose from sweat, surprise, the more you need to drink to stay hydrated.
And I'm a sweater, so I'm constantly drinking water.
Yeah, some people do sweat more than others.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that you're overhydrated, or that doesn't mean that you're not doing something correctly. A lot of that's genetic. And that just means that you're really good at cooling yourself, Alix.
Yeah, it must be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yes. And so something, to know that about yourself, you may need to think about water more if you do sweat a lot. A recent study was conducted by the International Journal of Sports Medicine to look at the effects on hypohydration, so not hydrating enough, on exercise performance. And we work with a lot of people who are active, and this is something that we look at all the time. But this study found that hypohydration increases heat storage and reduces your ability to tolerate heat strain, which is not a good thing whenever you're trying to exercise. The increased heat storage is mediated by reducing sweat rate, so you sweat less, and reduce skin blood flow. That's dry heat loss. The sweat is evaporative heat loss. And so those are two ways that your body tries to get rid of heat, and it's not doing those as well. So hyperhydration, which is increased total body water, has been suggested to reduce physiologic strain during exercise heat stress. So if it's hot outside, staying well hydrated and drinking water actually makes it easier for your body to maintain the correct temperature. And at some point, if you're not maintaining the correct temperature, you can have heat stroke, and your performance definitely goes down, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. So, and that supports previous research that losing more than 2% of your body weight through fluid loss can be detrimental to athletic performance and exercise. And 2% isn't that much. So, so that's something that's interesting. And we usually have all of our athletes, especially competitive athletes, weigh themselves before and after exercise, so we can see, how much that hydration dehydration is affecting their performance and where they need to be to stay well hydrated. Even 1% fluid loss in the body increases your heart rate by 3 to 5 beats a minute. So that's significant. And 1 to 2% fluid loss equals 10 to 15% slower paces. So this is huge.
It's a lot.
Yeah. So that's huge. And sweat losses during 2 hours of exercise can be 2 liters or more. And that's a good general rule that per hour of exercise, especially in the heat, you're going to lose at least 1 liter per hour. And so when you're thinking about that, that's a decent amount of water.
That's a lot of water, and especially for like if you just sweat normally quite a bit, like myself, but then you add heat to it, I mean, you can lose a ton of fluid. So it's definitely important to stay hydrated, like Cassie was talking about. And athletes out there losing more than 2%, like she said, it doesn't take that. 2% is not a lot. And we do sweat rates a lot. So if you're ever curious what your sweat rate is, we can tell you that. We have athletes weighing before and after their activity and then calculating how much fluid they have during, and then we can tell athletes you need to have this much in certain intervals. So it's pretty interesting to see sometimes how much fluid people actually need. And now we're going to move into another thing we need to keep in mind with staying hydrated.
So on top of thermoregulation, like Cassie just talked about, water is also important around your joints. So there's something called synovial fluid, which surrounds your joints, all your joints in the human body, right? And so this is just a thick fluid that lubricates the joint and allows for ease of movement. So in joint diseases like arthritis, the synovium of the joint is the main place where inflammation occurs. So this is another reason why hydration is important, because you have water around your joints, and inflammation often occurs in diseases and stuff like that. So something to think about. Water also protects your spinal cord and sensitive tissues. It also helps to get rid of waste through urination, perspiration, and bowel movement. So urination is going to be your major avenue of fluid loss during resting conditions, whereas sweating, that mechanism that you use to cool yourself, is going to be your major avenue of fluid loss during exercise. You actually, if you have to go to the bathroom before you exercise, you may find out that while you're exercising and afterwards, you're like, oh yeah, I had to go to the bathroom. It's because you're not focused on excreting urine at that point. You're focused on getting blood to the muscles that are working. So that's interesting. Mm-hmm. And then last but not least, water is also very important for keeping all of our vital organs functioning properly. That's one of the reasons why you can't last very long without water, because you may send yourself into organ failure and then eventually death. And so specifically heart health. So lack of fluid lowers your blood volume. And so your heart must work harder to pump the reduced amount of blood and get enough oxygen to your cells, which this can just make everyday activities a lot more difficult. And in addition, your kidneys, they need water to filter waste from your blood and excrete it in urine, so urination, right? So keeping hydrated may also prevent UTIs and kidney stones, etc. So I know when I was doing clinical rotations in the hospital, I saw a lot of older people who aren't necessarily focused and don't have that thirst mechanism. As you get older, that kind of goes away, and a lot of them actually had UTIs, and that was mainly an onset of dehydration. So
yeah, and speaking on that, I did a rotation in a nursing home, and whenever they're not elderly, some elderly people aren't able to verbalize what they're feeling, and a lot of it was discomfort from UTIs, what I saw tons of. So again, that's the hydration and why it's so important. So moving on to how much do we need? And generally speaking, you want to try to aim for about half your body weight in ounces daily. So if you're 150 pounds, divide that by 2. It's about 75 ounces of water. It's about 9.5 cups of water. So we hear a lot about 8 cups or so. That could be low. It could be high. Generally speaking, though, at least you're staying going to be pretty hydrated with that 8 cups, but you could need more, especially if you're really active, if you're out in the heat, if you sweat a lot. So this will vary depending on climate, physical activity, sweat rate, height, weight, fat mass, gender. There's all types of things that play a role into how much water that you do need. And there are some specific groups that are actually more susceptible to becoming dehydrated, and you need to keep track of how hydrated you are. First and foremost, which some people may not think of, are babies and infants, cute little babies. They do have a very low body weight, as we know, so they're more sensitive to even small fluid fluctuations. So So if your baby is like having major diarrhea, which is never fun, or like throwing up a lot, then they could be more susceptible to dehydration. They have a higher surface area to volume area, so it's important to make sure that your baby is hydrated. Like we already talked about, that elderly population, their body's fluid reserve becomes smaller, thirst is less acute, and then other chronic diseases that play into that require that population to be more hydrated, but it also makes them more susceptible to being dehydrated. So again, important to make sure hydration is on the top of the list for that group. Also, like we talked about UTIs, if dehydration is happening often, we got to make sure we're staying hydrated. And then long-term health conditions, diabetes, kidney disease, you need to be extra careful with staying hydrated because dehydration can be more prominent. And then lastly, with athletes, like we already talked about, we want to make sure that you're staying hydrated depending on if you're indoor athlete, outdoor athlete, how long is the activity? Are you in Florida? Are you in Colorado? There's lots of different things that come into play, but general hydration, have your body weight in ounces outside of activity is important. So do you guys have anything to add to that, or you want to move on to how to get fluid?
So, well, the only thing I would add to the athletes is just also it's very normal to have different needs in different conditions. And I know that seems simple, but it's not something that everybody thinks about. So say you exercise outside, depending on the weather, you may need to change your fluid needs. And so we usually recommend getting that weighed before and after several times a year. And humidity plays a role, temperature plays a role, and then also what you have to wear. So you have a sport like football, for example, where you have to wear pads and have all these clothes on, and maybe you're training in August, they may have huge needs for hydration. And if you think about what you have to do in football, you typically have to be fast, and so if you're not focusing on that, then you can really negatively affect your performance because you're going to slow down, and you're going to get hotter, and you might have more risk of heat illness. And so hydration is really important, and this is something for all you coaches out there. It's something very simple that you can do. You're not making athletes tougher by not giving them fluid during training. This is something that we always want to encourage with coaches to let your athletes drink and keep them hydrated because they're going to perform better. So
yeah, absolutely. And then same thing with athletic trainers too, because I know a lot of the hydration side is up to you as well. Keeping sports drinks on the sideline if you're outside for more than an hour and it's hot, like football players, like Cassie said, they're doing 2-a-days at camp and full pads when it's hot. So making sure there's fluid and sports drinks available, that you could grab a bottle, maybe not during COVID, but making sure that there's fluid around safely so players can grab hydration, because that's going to be super important. So ways to get fluid. Any drink and some foods will promote hydration. So Cassie, let's go through some of these that we have on here.
Yeah, so we get a lot of questions about this, so we'll go through these. Obviously, some choices are healthier than others, and we'll point those out. But around 60% of fluid typically comes from drinks. So if you don't drink anything during the day, you're probably not well hydrated. And some people don't drink anything during the day. So let's go through some things that are hydrating. First of all, milk. A lot of people don't think about milk, but milk does hydrate you. It's 87% water. It also has important nutrients that are very healthy: calcium, vitamin D, protein, carbs, electrolytes. So it also has potassium in there, and magnesium. So it has a lot of things in it, and so it does work towards your hydration recommendations throughout the day. It does have calories, and so sometimes it can add more calories than you want or need, and so be aware of that. But it does hydrate you. Tea is another one that hydrates you, and this is something that a lot of people get excited about because they can drink tea for some of their water, and that's good. It does, and this is one of the beverages that also has caffeine, if it's green tea or black tea. So people always wonder if it dehydrates you. It does have a mild diuretic effect, but it still overall hydrates you. So you're better off after you have the tea than before you had the tea. So you get a hydrating effect. Definitely there's some room for people to add sugar there. So we recommend unsweet tea. And so that's something we don't, if you're using something that has sugar in it to meet your hydration needs, that's not something that we typically recommend, because sugar sweetened beverages really can contribute to your total sugar grams, which can be a negative on your health. And then also more calories than you want to have. Flavored waters are mostly water, but then you're wondering what they're flavored with. And so there's that natural flavors on the label. You'll see that a lot, or essence of XYZ flavor, natural flavor. And again, if they were proud of what it was, they'd tell you what it was. So I'm always leery of those natural flavors. Not that they're going to negatively affect you. I just get frustrated that they aren't honest with what they're putting in there. So that's probably just my hang up. but I would rather have something. I know like Spindrift has is one brand that has a water that tells you what the flavor is actually from on there, and it's from actual fruit usually. So that's something that they're a little bit more honest with their labeling. If you like flavored waters, and you can also put your own flavor. You can put your own things. I love to make like cucumber and mint water or strawberry and basil, and I just throw some of that in a water jug and put it in my fridge.
Yeah, so. And they have bottles now that you can like infuse like that. I don't have one.
They
but
have cheap ones on Amazon, I think.
Yeah. So look on Amazon. You heard it here first.
You did.
If you like those,
if you like it,
it is an easy way to make your water taste different. Or and you can also do carbonated water that has a different flavor. So plain carbonated water, and add lime juice, lemon juice. If you wanted to do that as well, you don't have to get the flavored. You could add your own things to carbonated if you like the carbonated part, and a lot of people do. And that's going to be a lot healthier than sodas, of course. Coffee actually hydrates you. So that's a common question that we get. Same thing with tea. It's a mild diuretic, but overall it's a hydrating beverage. And the more that you're used to drinking coffee, the less diuretic effect you're going to typically have. So someone who's never had coffee before and drinks it for the first time may have a little bit more of a diuretic effect than someone that like me that drinks it every day.
Same here.
2 cups every day.
That's how we get through our early mornings. And then again, coffee's another one. You have to really look at what you add, and that's something. Again, we're focusing on these habits that we want you to do every day. And so if you're constantly adding sugar to your coffee, that's something that you do every day very consistently. Those habits really add up, and so you have to really look at those. So if you can get to where you have it with just milk or drink it black, and I had to transition. I used to like it with all sorts of stuff in it too, and so it can be done. You can learn to like black coffee.
I was like the venti caramel mocha frappuccino back in early college. So I couldn't afford it anymore.
It's very expensive. So yes, you can learn to like black coffee.
Yes.
We are a testament to that. I love black coffee now. So that I like. I think the other stuff messes it up. So you can get to that point. Yes. Juice also hydrates you, but it definitely has a lot of sugar in it, and it's not a healthy beverage that we would recommend just because they take all the fiber out, and you can drink same sugar as a soda, so you can get a lot of grams of added sugar, and I would really count that as an added sugar, not a natural sugar, because it is more of a concentrated form of sugar, even though it comes from fruit. If you juice, this is another question I get, say you make your own juice and it's mostly vegetables, maybe a tiny bit of apple in there, that can have some more health benefits, but the stuff you get from the store definitely doesn't have a whole lot of benefit. Energy drinks, we don't recommend those because they're not regulated and they can be dangerous. So avoid those. So sports drinks are excellent for sports. It's not something that people need to just hang out on the couch while they're watching TV or hanging out drinking sports drinks. So
it's a sport drink.
It's a sport drink. And actually sports drinks are better at hydrating you and rehydrating you if you are playing a sport. So if you're say we mentioned football. If you're a football player, you're actually going to hydrate yourself more effectively and faster if you drink a sports drink than if you drink plain water. So if you drink plain water, your body has to pull some sodium in to absorb it. So if you have a sports drink that has salt in it, and then you also have carbs in it, it affects the absorption rate and how well it hydrates you. So we won't go into all the science of that, but sports drinks work really well at hydrating you during practice, during training, and then also for, say you weigh yourself before and after an event or practice and you've lost like 6 pounds, you're going to hydrate yourself faster. Maybe you have a 2-a-day workout or you want to feel better faster. You're going to hydrate yourself faster right after that workout with a sports drink than you would with just plain water. So sports drinks definitely have their place, and people often won't drink them during exercise because they're concerned about the sugar, but you handle sugar differently during exercise too. So we definitely recommend those because they work really well during exercise. Outside of exercise, not so much. So if you're working outside in the summertime and you have a lot of issues with cramping, dehydration, sports drinks might be helpful for that as well if you have an active job outside. Fruits and veggies also really can give you some good hydration. 20 to 30% of fluid comes from fruits and veggies. And so that's another reason we want you to have those throughout the day, because they can be a significant part of keeping you hydrated. So lots of options.
Yes, lots of options. Yes. So, moral of the story, there's lots of different avenues to stay hydrated, and some more calorie dense than others, so we got to be cautious of that. But overall, lots of different ways that we can stay hydrated. So now we're going to move into dehydration, because it's important to touch on that too and kind of know the signs and symptoms and all that stuff. So dehydration in itself is a dangerous loss of body fluid by illness, sweating, or inadequate intake. More Americans are dehydrated compared to hydrated.
Right, and since we know that, we want you guys to know what things to look out for, especially because we work in a gym setting. You know, I have clients come up to me all the time. They're like, I feel really dizzy right now. When was the last time you drank water? Well, I haven't drank water all day. Okay, maybe that's something we need to address. And they do present themselves, dehydration symptoms present themselves differently based on your age, your gender, what sport you're performing, all of that stuff. So some things to look for in infants and younger children is dry mouth and tongue, no tears when crying, decreased wet diapers. Wet diapers are a good indicator, especially for over 3 hours. Sunken eyes and extremely irritable, so probably lots of crying.
Yeah. I'm sure that's hard to tell for some. I'm sure crying happens a lot.
Yeah. And then in adults, we see things like generalized fatigue, extreme thirst, less frequent urination, dizziness, like I mentioned, confusion. And there are early symptoms that present themselves that are what we would call less severe than later symptoms. You know, heat stroke can eventually occur from dehydration, which it presents itself a lot different than the earlier stages. So in heat stroke, you actually don't sweat because your body's not cooling yourself efficiently. So some things that can happen because of dehydration on the topic of heat strokes is heat injuries and heat illness. So when you're not drinking enough fluids and you're experiencing vigorous and perspiring heavily in high heat, you may end up with a heat injury. And these can range in severity from mild heat cramps to heat exhaustion or potentially life-threatening heat stroke, which can put you in the hospital. And if it's not treated effectively, it can result in death. So things to think about, especially if you are in environments where your rate of perceived exertion, so the difficulty of it, is shot way up higher. That's something you definitely want to pay attention to and make sure that you're hydrating effectively. Next is urinary and kidney problems. So we've talked about UTIs like 3 or 4 times already. This is because you're not hydrating effectively, so your kidneys aren't able to eliminate all of that waste. So prolonged or repeated bouts of dehydration can cause those UTIs. Kidney stones can occur, and even kidney failure in very severe cases. Next, we see seizures, and this specifically comes from that electrolyte imbalance that occurs with dehydration, so the potassium and sodium that we talked about that are in sports drinks and are part of that process of hydrating you. They carry electrical signals from cell to cell, and if those electrolytes are out of balance, the normal electrical messages that get sent from cell to cell can be mixed up, which can lead to involuntary muscle contractions and sometimes a loss of consciousness, and then result in those seizures, which is extremely dangerous and something that we definitely don't want to see happen. And then low blood volume shock, which we call hypovolemic shock, one of the most serious and sometimes life-threatening complications of dehydration. So this would be one of those later signs of dehydration, it's way more severe. And this occurs when your blood volume gets really low, your blood pressure tanks, and you have an overall drop in the amount of oxygen in your body. So again, super dangerous. This would put you in the hospital. I've seen patients that have hypovolemic shock or were admitted for hypovolemic shock, and it's a serious thing. And then last but not least, we have talked about this specifically with those who are active and athletes, is impaired performance. So things that happen whenever you are performing your sport or exercising and you're not hydrated adequately, you'll see decreases in your overall muscle strength, your speed, your stamina, energy, cognitive processes, and this can lead to an overall increase in risk of injury. So stress fractures, things like that. And actually 95% of muscle cramps are due to dehydration. So interesting.
Yes, that is interesting. And these are a lot of some of the major complications. Again, 75% of Americans are just generally dehydrated. And it may not even be something that you notice. And then as dietitians, we're like, hey, we need to try to have half our body weight in ounces daily. And then you're like, I have to pee all the time. But your body will adapt to that because probably you were chronically dehydrated before that. So again, these are just symptoms that might be a little more on the more severe side. So we talked about dehydration. Now we're going to move into overhydration, aka water intoxication. So it's seen mostly as a result of overhydration during sporting events or intense training. So we typically don't see this as much with people trying to overhydrate, but it's people thinking like, yes, I need to hydrate, but then they take it to the extreme a lot of the time. General symptoms include confusion, disorientation, nausea, vomiting. So that's kind of scary because it's almost the same type of symptoms as being dehydrated. So it's definitely important to know how much fluid generally that you need. Our kidneys can only eliminate so much per hour, about 0.8 to 1 liter per hour, but large amounts of fluid can disrupt our electrolyte balance in our body like we were talking about earlier. So overhydration can dilute our electrolytes and it can mess up the signaling of all of that. So it's important to be sure that we're not overhydrating. Rare cases of overhydration can cause swelling in the brain and become fatal. So if you're 90 pounds, you don't need to be carrying around a gallon of water with you everywhere. And no offense to the people that carry around the milk jug of water. You can totally do that if you want to. But a lot of people don't need that much water. If you just need to be aware of where you need to be at for how much you need to do in a day. If sodium levels fall below 135 millimoles per liter, that means hyponatremia. Sodium helps maintain the balance of fluids inside and out of the cells, and Cassie touched on this a little bit earlier. When sodium levels drop due to overhydration, fluids travel from the outside to the inside of the cell, and that causes the cell to swell. So that is not a good thing. No. So we got to be sure that we kind of know where we need to be at. Don't overhydrate. Like we've all said, it's harder to overhydrate than be dehydrated. Severe cases of water intoxication can produce some serious symptoms such as drowsiness, muscle weakness and cramping, increased blood pressure, and in the most serious cases, cerebral edema, so central nervous system dysfunction. So overhydration, again, is not something we see as often, but it does happen. So it's important to be sure to know where you're at, especially if you're in high heat, not to overdo it. So how to monitor hydration status. So we're talking about dehydration, overhydration, but how do we know when we're hydrated?
Yes, so there are a couple ways. The easiest, the most simple and free way to do it is look at your urine color. So just check out after you go to the bathroom and see if it is something that looks like lemonade, then that probably means that you're pretty well hydrated. If it looks like apple juice or it's very concentrated, then that means that you might be dehydrated. And so that's a very simple way to tell, because as you can see, there is no black and white definite answer for everyone as far as exact ounces for how much you need to drink to stay well hydrated. So look at that, first thing in the morning and see what it looks like. How well are you doing with your hydration? And then Post-it note is a color. I say lemonade, but Post-it note is another color that also you can think about. So, and then sweat loss also, for every pound lost, you want to be sure that you're consuming at least 16 ounces, which is 2 cups of fluid post-workout. So getting your weight before and after workouts to see where you are as far as your hydration status. So your body weight can tell you a lot. A lot of people are trying to, maybe lose weight on the scale. And so if they're a little dehydrated, the scale is going to go down, and that actually encourages that behavior. But we like to see their water weight staying. So don't just focus on the scale and get excited when it goes down, because it might mean that you're dehydrated. So So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've lost body fat. And I didn't mention before when I was saying all the sources of hydration that water is a good way to stay hydrated. So I just was thinking about that. So water actually hydrates you very well. But it's funny. It's funny.
It's not on the list.
It was funny that people actually are concerned about drinking plain water because they don't think it's an effective hydrator. But it actually is. It's not as effective, like I mentioned, during sports that are in the heat. It's not as effective at hydrating you. And some people like to put a little bit of salt in their water or drink an electrolyte water. And that is absorbed more effectively, but that doesn't mean that plain water doesn't hydrate you, because that's not true. Plain water is great and it serves a great purpose. But if you have water with a little bit of salt in it, it is absorbed a little bit more effectively. But most people, that doesn't even matter during the day. So
Right.
If you're in extreme conditions, if you're really trying to stay on top of your hydration in an event, we definitely recommend replacing those electrolytes and having a drink that has that in it so you absorb it more effectively. And again, right after exercise, water isn't the best way. It still will hydrate you though. So if you have plenty of time to rehydrate yourself, water is a great choice. If you're trying to do it pretty quickly during activity, then sports drinks are better. So that's a common misconception, that water doesn't hydrate you well either, which is interesting.
Yeah,
That
is
we do
interesting.
hear that definitely from some people. So but water does hydrate you.
I'm glad you added that to the list.
Yeah.
Water does hydrate you. Good.
That's what we recommend the most.
Yes, absolutely. So last but not least, tips to stay hydrated. So we're talking about drinking more water and adding more fluids, but what are good ways to do that?
So because most people are dehydrated, you will probably find at least one of these tips helpful. And one of the things that we mentioned before, especially, I know my dad hates the taste of plain water, never understood that. So I got him to put lemons in his water. So infusing your water, if that means buying one of those cool water bottles, if that's what it's going to take to get you to try that so that you will increase your overall fluid intake, go ahead, give it a try. By no means do you have to, but it may make that taste a little more palatable so you feel like you're drinking something other than water, which again will increase your overall daily intake. You can also try just like setting a glass of water on your nightstand or on your windowsill, whatever is right next to your bed, and just drinking a quick 4 to 8 ounces the first thing that you do when you get up. I've tried this before and I like it. It gets me feeling like I am ready to drink more water. So you don't have to, but again, if that's something that you think will help you, just have it there readily accessible. By all means, try it. You can also set reminders. I know, at least on Apple Watch, I think maybe Fitbits have it too. I don't have a Fitbit, I have an Apple Watch, but you can have your watch remind you to take a drink of water, which is the accountability that some people need. You can also have some sort of like daily tally sheet, like if you want to get 9 cups of water in, just check them off throughout the day. I think MyFitnessPal lets you log your cups of water in there as well. And then you can also start replacing other sources of liquid with water at your meals, or adding a glass of water with that liquid. I know this is something that I recently tried with one of my clients, and they found that really helpful because at meals she was used to having things that weren't as hydrating for her case, and we tried water and it worked great for her. So you can also bring whatever water bottle or Starbucks reusable cup, the cold drink cup that you want. I know a lot of women like those. Get a fun water bottle and you know how many ounces are in it. So if it's 20 ounces and you need to drink 80 ounces in a day, drink 4 of those. That makes it a little less daunting to know how many times you need to refill your water bottle. And then of course you can eat more fruits and vegetables, because we do know that they contain water and they will contribute to your overall water intake, and they're full of great things, and as dietitians, that's our plug.
Always more fruits and veggies.
Yeah. More fruits and veggies. That's funny you say that about the bottle. I had to go buy like a $20 Starbucks bottle with a straw because I was struggling to get enough, and it's hard sometimes.
Yeah.
We understand that, but we just want you to be more aware of it, and make goals for yourself. Might be smaller goals, maybe 10 more ounces this week, 10 more ounces the next week, but let's try to stay more hydrated, especially now that it's getting warmer.
Yes.
So this was another episode of Practical Nutrition, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.